Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to go over the MSK module and kind of run through kind of a question answer based session. We will make sure any questions that you guys have will be addressed. We have like initial set of PowerPoint slides that we're going to run through. And after that, at any time also feel free to jump in, throw your questions in the chat, and we will address them. So my name is Kishore. I am now, as weird as it's crazy and weird to say now, I am a year 2 med student now. Kassidy, go ahead.
Yes, and I'm Kassidy. I'm in the same boat. So Kishore and I are in the same term, and we did just finish term 2 last week. So we are year 2 now.
All right, so let's get this started. So we just put together some slides for you guys, kind of outlining and putting some resources together. So I will share this PowerPoint after the session ends. Okay, so the PLG, we run the, here's the TPLG. The slide and the group and everything is all posted into our Facebook page. So feel free to share, scan the link or etc. And you can join the group. And we have access to a Google Drive where we will be posting these slides as well as any like helpful resources and etc. Cool. So the MSK module overview. So what you will be covering for the next 4 weeks of your life. So this module, it can kind of gets overwhelming. So you're going to cover both regional anatomy as well as clinical correlates of like back, arm, thorax, abdominal cavity, as well as lower limb. So basically the entirety of the human being in the next 4 weeks. And trust me, it sounds scary, but it tends to be fun and you're going to learn a lot and it's great. At the tail end of it, you're going to cover histology, physiology, and biochemistry. They like tend to load you guys up with that information because it tends to be less thought process heavy. It's more of like intuitive and kind of makes sense if you just go through the lecture slides. But they kind of front load all of the anatomy based stuff in the beginning, and it helps a lot. Trust me. Our term had it completely different, and we made a big advocacy effort to make sure that it was restructured the way it is now. And trust me, the previous term, they also enjoyed how it was structured, and likely you guys will too. So our general approach, and this is just something I've just compiled, and I always have this kind of quote stuck in my head, whereas you learn one, you do one, and then you teach one. So it's a common phrase that they often use in surgery, and it's and trust me, I don't want to go into surgery, but I think it's a great motto to kind of live by, because first, you got to make sure you're well versed in the own material that it's presented, right? Like in the slides, any of your anatomy apps that you use, I put links to that here. Those are great. You don't necessarily have to get one. I put external resources that are free that you can essentially cover that wouldn't be of any cost to you guys. But these are also apps that potentially other folks use. So I just threw that on there for kind of completion's sake. Believe it or not, drawing out on yourself any sort of nerves or blood flow was super helpful. I know our friends Brady and Lindsay in the Scrubs page and Dog Mom DES, like they're big advocacy of like making sure you draw out these structures, because it really puts it into memory in a completely different way. Like you can sit there and look at the slides like 5 billion times, but it's not going to be as beneficial if you just draw it out, put it on a whiteboard or etc., or even on yourself. A lot of people just took a pen and then they were like, okay, blood supply from the cuboidal fossa all the way down to the phalanges, like what's happening. So they'll just go through step by step of the blood flow, innervations, and etc. So for the challenging concepts, I know our slides, like especially SGU slides, can be super dense. Use external resources when it's appropriate. Remember, we always advocate that you guys use your lecture slides first. It's important, okay? Trust me, what you get tested on is the lecture slides. Next, you gotta do your Grey's Anatomy questions. Like, I know it sucks and you initially like go through the lecture slides and you're like, okay, I kind of get this, or I don't really need to do questions until we're at the tail end of the system that I'm covering, whether it's the back or the arms or etc. Do questions as much as you can every day, because it really gives you a perspective as to what you will be actually tested on, because it's so hard, because you can know a structure, but they got to put it in a clinical context for you to understand the greater implications. And I'm a big advocate of this. Download the IMCQs and quizzes and use them as practice, because they are coming straight from SGU, and that's what you're likely going to get tested on. So use the similar stems and concepts to really hone in on the ideas that they're likely going to show during your exam time. And for the physiology lectures, do the assigned questions and the DES questions that students have compiled. You should be good. It's not too crazy hard, and they're going to reiterate a lot of these biochemical pathways and physiological pathways and changes in subsequent like lectures and modules. So don't get too crazy caught up on those, and but still study those. And of course, finally, in terms of teach one, I always advocate group study when you can, whether it's silent study. It's always helpful to just hop on Zoom and just straight up, you know, talk through concepts, make mnemonics, and kind of reinforce the idea. Okay, so that's the general approach. We're going to give you our individual approach. I'm going to take a pause and let Kassidy go first, because I've been chatting away. Take it away, Cass.
Okay. Yeah. So going with your previous, like Kishore, yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And I just want to reiterate, there's a lot of practice tests and practice questions out there that are written by students. But I, like Kishore said, am a huge advocate of just using the assigned practice questions by the professors, the IMCQs, and the quizzes, going back through all my old quizzes, because the problem with student written practice questions is, you know, sometimes there's errors, or sometimes they're out of the scope, or sometimes they might not exactly match up with how you're going to get asked things on the exam. But the IMCQ questions, the grades questions, and all of that, that's definitely how you are going to get asked stuff. So I completely agree with that. So that leads to the grades questions. I know you guys have probably heard from every person that gives any type of advice about MSK that you have to do these practice questions in the Gray's Anatomy book. And that is 100% true. If you look at that book, one of the authors of that book is actually Dr. Lucas, which is one of our deans. So that in and of itself shows you that those questions are going to be very similar to what you see on the exam. There are a lot of them, so you cannot neglect them. You can't just wait until towards the end to start doing them. There are tons of them. And I remember they always took me a lot longer than I expected them to. So, oh, Lindsay's here. Hey, Lindsay. They always took me a lot longer than I expected. So start on those as soon as you can. And then what I used to do, you know, some people will say you need to do them all at least twice or at least 3 times. That's not necessarily true in my opinion. I used to go through all of them and then mark the ones that I got wrong, or the ones that I thought maybe were really tricky or hard. And then I used to go back through those. And then to add to that, with the grades questions, you get more out of those by reading the answer explanations, because when you get to the answer section of that book, it explains every answer option and why it's, so it'll explain the right one and why it's right, but it also goes through every other answer choice and explains why those are wrong. So I used to legitimately take notes from the answer section of the Gray's Anatomy book, and I would learn more from that than really, honestly, like anything else at all. So those are extremely important. And then Kishore mentioned this, but drawing stuff is a big thing. So when I used to whiteboard stuff for MSK, like the anatomy stuff, I liked to draw like the limb, let's say it's an arm. And then I would do the blood supply, like the arterial supply, maybe in red. And I would do all of that in red on the arm. And then I would do the venous supply in blue right next to the arterial supply. And then I would do the nerves in a different color. The arm's a little bit tricky with the nerves because the brachial plexus, there's a lot of them, but I used to do all of that. And then the lymphatics I would do in green, and I would put all of those together on the same drawing, because then you can see how stuff is connected and how things kind of run together, how lymph runs with veins and things like that. And I was one of the people that drew on myself. So with the brachial plexus, that gets really tricky with the arm. So I did each of the nerves in a different color, and I'm not very smart, so I did it in Sharpie, and like it was there for a while, but I remembered exactly what it looked like on my arm because it was there for so long. So that was very helpful. And then as far as the outside resources, there's this man named Dr. Preddy on YouTube, and they're just regular YouTube videos recording this guy teaching to his class. He's an anatomy teacher who's also, I believe, a surgeon. He's great. Like the way he teaches the muscles and how you can remember them is awesome. So we will make sure you guys have links to those, but it's really easy to find. You can just go on YouTube and type in Dr. Preddy. And then I also liked Osmosis for the embryology concepts because they seem to, just the way they format stuff, the way it looks, they break it down, but keep it as simple as possible. And for embryology specifically, and I think the brachial plexus, I used Osmosis a lot in MSK. But that's pretty much it there from my standpoint. Kishore?
So totally, I agree. I used all those resources and I definitely drew out the pathways, not on myself. I tried that once and then I realized I get super nervous and then my hands get like clammy and then like all of those ink just get literally pasted onto like white paper. So like I can't partake in that activity, but it's really helpful. I trust me, it's awesome. I've seen folks do it and they've gotten their anatomy and their innervations and blood supply down to a dot, and it's awesome. Now, my approach often tends to be very like a little different. I tend to kind of post read my slides with a group and then followed up with drawing out all of the anatomy structures. I have a giant iPad, so I like draw out every single structure, and I'm happy to share my notes with you guys because they're all consolidated over like 10 pages, and it has basically every single anatomy, embryology, etc. concepts all chucked into those 10 pages. And then I did Gray's questions and I did them at least twice. I was one of those crazy folks who did like more than what was assigned, but honestly, that really messed with me more than it helped because I would just like learn these random concepts that weren't really tested on during the actual exam. So stick to the ones that they assign. It's not a big deal if others tell you to do more. Just keep reinforcing the material because it's really helpful. Trust me, like if you do these questions, because it reinforces and also puts it into context of how it's going to be clinically presented to you. Like you can learn about the brachial plexus conceptually, but you can't see the actual effects of it until you see like a clinical presentation. And Grace does a really, really good job of giving you like nice, clean presentations to kind of work with and what type of damage you'll likely see. Cool. That being said, let's go to our next slide. So here we put together some external resources, and trust me, as always, stick to your slides first. Don't like hop onto YouTube every single time after like lecture to find out like something new. We've made life easy for you guys. We've given you guys links to all of the DES pages that we found hella helpful, including our own there and their weekend review sessions. Sign up for those because really the upper termers that are probably on this call, like Lindsay, they are a huge blessing. They will guide you through this entire process, and it's awesome because you just leave lecture feeling defeated, and then you kind of like realize, okay, like I need to focus on these concepts alone. I don't need to like overwork myself with like everything on this like lecture. So they contextualize the material a lot. I definitely use the noted anatomist a lot. He's really great. His drawings are amazing, and I'm a very visual person. And any single time he like presents something awesome, like it's nice and clean, and he walks you through all of like the blood supply, innervation, and lymphatics in that area. CK Med, awesome guy. He is a graduate of SGU, amazing dude. He has an entire playlist for various different modules, not just MSK, but he has ones on CPR and etc. So like you guys just save his like YouTube link. Really helpful. Trust me, you're gonna thank us later for that. Ninja Nerd is always our go-to. He's amazing. Only thing is his reviews and slides, or like sorry, his videos tend to be longer, so just be warned. He is very thorough, he's amazing, but make sure you guys lock in some time to like, if you guys really don't understand the concept, whether it be MSK or if you have something else in the future, really great. It's a free resource, so use that. Armando Hasudigan, he's also amazing. He's also a big drawer like me, and he's great. So, and then we have some notable mentions of Boards and Beyond, Osmosis, and Amboss. These are great, but remember you have to pay for them, and they're not free. So just be aware if you do have subscriptions, these are also great resources that you guys can use, etc. That being said, we're basically done. So do you guys have any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So going over the first 2 days of lecture, I know I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but I felt like sometimes it's all these, first like they're teaching us muscles and then the arteries and the nerves. So it's really hard kind of piecing the information together. Could you guys like comment on maybe what to learn first, like whether the innervation or the arterial supply or the muscles? Because for me, like it's been 2 days and I'm honestly really overwhelmed by just kind of, it's not even like you can memorize something, like you can memorize a brachial plexus, but then it's just like piecing all the information together.
Yeah. Cass, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I know we got told this a lot by the professors. Like I know Dr. Rayburn used to say this all the time, and I don't think a lot of us believed it until maybe after we should have, but you really don't need to know the material that well to start doing practice questions. And the sooner you start doing practice questions, the sooner you'll learn how you need to be teaching yourself the material. So if you're like, what did you guys start with? Back muscles? Was that the first thing?
Yes.
Okay. So I know there's like a lot of assigned practice questions on the back because I remember I waited until I think maybe even after the first week to start them. And I was like, I wish I would have started this a lot sooner because first of all, the back is probably like the lowest yield thing on that whole exam. So they start with the back because the other stuff is going to be harder and it's going to be more high yield and more questions. But when you start doing the practice questions, you'll see like, okay, this is how they can ask me a question about this, because it's hard when you're studying and you haven't quite figured out SGU exams quite yet. I know you guys have had two, but like I felt like more in term two, we started to learn, okay, how can they ask me a question about this? And that's how I would direct my studying. So if you can try to do that in MSK, like how can they ask me a question about this? The only way you're really going to be able to do that is by starting the practice questions. So even if you don't feel like you know the material at all, you can learn just by doing the practice questions and then saying, okay, this is where I'm really weak. This is how they're going to ask it. So maybe this is the way I need to draw it out on my whiteboard or on myself or, on my iPad or something like that. So if you feel lost, just start doing practice questions and they'll probably give you some sense of direction.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also like, trust me, like, yes, you start out, they're just giving you all these muscles. They give you like all of the nerves, all of the blood supply, and you're just like, what do I do with all of this? Like knowledge, like it just doesn't seem to tie together. Trust me, it will. And you'll start to realize patterns, right? Like Cassidy is saying, like you'll see specifically what they like to test, and they'll make it very I mean, kind of obvious with the grace questions. Like, for example, like the trap muscle. So you're going to be like, okay, what's the innervation? Like, what's going on? You're going to be like spinal accessory, followed by like cranial nerves cervical nerves 3 and 4. Basically, innervate this structure, right? Now, how are they going to ask me that? Okay, am I going to be able to lift up my shoulder sufficiently to comb my hair? So, like, that tends to be like one of their favorite questions to ask about the trap muscles. So you'll start to see those patterns as you do Gray's question. Trust me, I walked out of the exact same lecture feeling like I have no idea what the heck is happening. And I took anatomy. Like I was like, clearly I'm doing something wrong here. But do those questions. I know it sounds like we're beating a dead horse here, but like it's so good because it reinforces something and it guides you too. Because like you have no idea what to focus on because they give you everything. Blood, innervation, and lymphatics. Like it's a lot. Like you can spend an entire term learning about the human body's anatomy and you'll still be confused. So the Grace questions are a blessing.
Just to,
Um,
I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
So would you like suggest, I mean, I know you guys mentioned this like a few times now. So if you're going, like if you're doing your post review, say, and okay, and you don't understand the material 100%, like you try to do post review as best as you can, and then would you suggest like every single day you should have like a specific amount of time just separately just for the practice question, like you should definitely do them every single day? And then also, could you just like give us some tips on like what to focus on embryo? Because I've heard like they don't test a lot on embryo, it's just the clinical correlates for the embryo, and embryo is like we went through the DLAs and it's just like all over the place. We have no idea.
Trust me, we so embryo isn't going to be the highest yield, and we're saying that with a little bit more confidence now, because now that we've gotten to term 2 and they like really emphasized embryo and certain things, like trust me, there's an entire section, entire module just dedicated to embryo and development and etc. So don't get too caught up on this. Honestly, a simple question such as like, what's the nucleus pulposus made out of? Like it's notochord. Like you like something as simple as that is an embryo question in and of itself. They really like the spina bifida. Okay, so like they like spina bifida occulta versus like something else. So like meningomyelocele or etc. Like you can play around with all of those. And remember, for the things that you're learning, always learn them based off of clinical correlates. Okay, it's not you don't have infinite amount of time in your hands, so you got to make sure you're very like targeted with your approach with MSK of like, okay, if they give me a thing, right, if they give me an embryological significant structure such as the nucleus pulposus, why do I need to learn it? Because herniations tend to happen at the nucleus pulposus, right? And then it gets to the fibrous layer, and from the fibrous layer, then it affects the innervation. So put it into clinical context, and trust me, it's going to be much more fun and more easy to learn the material, and without you kind of feeling overwhelmed. Because don't just sit there try to like go through the entire lecture material and being like, okay, like I need to know this date as to when it turns into a syncytiotrophoblast or etc. Like they're not going to test you on dates. Like there's no clinical correlate to it, but they do like the ones where it has real life implications or clinical correlates.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was gonna
so
say that
much.
as
That
well.
really helped.
I was going to say that as well, like when you asked generally about how to study for this stuff, when in doubt, and this will be the case like from now on forever through all the modules, when in doubt, just focus on the clinical correlates, because that's how they're going to ask you, the whole question stem is going to be describing someone with some type of disorder. Now they can go a couple different directions with what they end up actually asking you. Like Kishore was saying, they could paint this whole picture of some guy with a herniated disc. And they could either show you an MRI or whatever, and then they might ask you what the nucleus pulposus is a derivative of or something like that. But you have to start thinking of ways that they can relate that to the disorder. So in any situation at all, not just with embryo, focus more highly on the clinical correlates. So if you're getting frustrated with the slides or whatever, don't worry about that. But if there's a clinical correlate there, so when you start to get to the limbs and you see, okay, if the nerve was damaged here, what would happen? If the nerve was damaged here, what would happen? Stuff like that. And then I know with the back, I know, like you said, you've only had those 2 lectures so far, but with the back, I know there was like, I think it was a DLA, but there was a lot of imaging with the back. And I would say that is important, probably more important than all the muscles, because there's like those odontoid fractures, and then there's all of the different types of fractures in the back with like spondylolysis and spondylolisthesis and the herniated disc on the MRI and things like that. The imaging is probably a lot more high yield than the actual like muscles, lectures, and all of those nitty gritty details. And then the last thing I was going to say to focus on is exceptions always. So SGU likes to test exceptions. So if you see that something, there's like a rule to something, but there's an exception, like there's one part of it that's different, focus on that, because that's how they can ask you an exam question. So exceptions and clinical correlates are the biggest thing.
Yep. I see Brooke, you had a question on how you kind of go about taking notes. Honestly, anatomy notes, I think Cassidy's seen my notes of all the drawings. So if I show you guys that, and I'll post it onto the Here's the TPLG page of my notes so you guys kind of get a sense. What I do is I take a giant canvas, right? And I just draw out whatever structure that's being talked about. Like, let's say like we're talking about like the venous plexus in the spinal cord, right? Like what's going on? Is it like the anterior or the posterior versus the internal venous plexus? Like I will draw out the structures and then I will right next to it add the clinical correlates. And that way it's very simple. I'm actually even looking at my notes right now so I can see like what exactly I did back in the day. I kept it very much like what we were telling you guys. Like it's exactly one-to-one of like, okay, here is what we covered in lecture, follow it up with here's what we had as a clinical correlate for this thing. Like for example, like the triangle of Petit, like why are we sitting there learning about this? You can, that's a potential way you can auscultate the the lower the colon, and it's because it's a region where it gives you access to your internal abdominal cavity, right? So you can kind of run through things that way and make sure you kind of draw out the structures and then add in the clinical correlates, and you can get a better sense as to what's going to likely be tested. I hope that helps. Any other questions, guys?
Yeah, so for people who are not on Facebook, is there another place that we could get access to these resources you mentioned?
Well, you can save our drive, honestly, like because our Google Drive you can. It's I do say like, and I'm always a firm believer of having as few distractions in life as possible because med school it is in and of itself is plenty to stress you out with, but try to get on Facebook. There's a lot of like updates and things that tends to kind of come from both the class page as well as the various DES groups. It'll make your life so much easier because sometimes when we're going through like our material for our term, we sometimes have to just hop onto a Facebook page and we have to ask questions, or like we need to figure out some resources that students have like previously compiled. Like it's great. It's hugely beneficial. So I encourage you to do that, but you can also save our drives link, and you feel free to like message me or email me. I'll throw my SGU email on in the chat in a minute, and if you guys really do need to reach out, I can give you guys links to those. Any other questions?
Great, thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions, comments, concerns? We will have review sessions for you guys. I know we're on break technically, but I'll try my level best to compile things. We still have our recordings posted from previous MSK module. Feel free to watch those too. But if you guys ever need a review session, and now that we have a little bit more time, we will also host those review sessions over Zoom. Okay.
You guys can always message us if you have questions, like, whether it be on Facebook or whatever. We're always happy to answer questions whenever we can.
Definitely. Okay, so that being said, we are done. Thank you for coming. I'm going to end the recording here. Honestly, congrats to you guys again. You guys got through FTM. It was one of our least favorite modules, but it's great. You got into MSK proper, and CPR is more fun. So you guys are going to do great. So stay positive. You guys got this. And
I totally
best of
agree.
luck.
The hardest part, it gets better from there exponentially each time. So